How's it going, everybody? This is day 7 of 37 Conversations, and I'm gonna wait for my brother to join me so we can talk about 37 films real quick. All right, he just signed on. All right, here we go. Yo, what up, man?
How you doing, brother?
Chilling, bro. What's up to you?
Another day out here in Austin, man.
That's what's up. No, I feel you. We got some thunderstorms popping off right now, man. So you know how it goes in the spring and summer out here, boy.
Indeed. It's that
No
Tampa
doubt.
weather.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Yo, let's just get it popping, man. So go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
For sure. So I'm Chris's younger brother by 6 years. My name's Brandon. I live out here in Austin, Texas. I've lived out here for a few years now. Lived in Texas since 2003. As Chris has probably told you on multiple occasions, our dad's military, so his last duty station was based in San Antonio. So I've grown up here for the most part. Um, relatively speaking, outside of that, I work for a tech startup out here, as most everybody else does. I have a little bit of a vibe of what's going on out here in the Austin world.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Yeah, and also Brandon is not only my blood brother, but he's my frat brother. So shout out to the brothers of Phi Beta Sigma. You know what I'm saying?
Go mob.
Go mob. So listen, we're gonna get it popping, man. We're gonna get into these 37 films as part of this conversation series. By no means is this an all inclusive list. I mean, Brandon and I kind of poured over this, and we were trying to figure out which ones to put in, and we even had to make a honorable mention category, and that wasn't easy either. But we didn't want to make this a super long conversation. But
Right.
these are 37 films that we've seen, growing up or with our family or with one another. Most of them multiple times. And as it relates to this moment that we're in the United States with race and oppression and marginalization and social justice and everything like that, we wanted to put together a kind of a film series, if you will, just movies that mean something to us personally. Again, not all inclusive lists. I mean, there are certainly some others out there. Please, in the comments, put in the comments on the post, not in the chat, but in the post, additional movies that we didn't maybe think of or that we thought of, but we just didn't include in this discussion. So, you want to go first, bro?
Sure. One of the first up on my side is going to be When They See Us. I think this is a pretty dynamic series by Ava DuVernay, just because obviously these five young individuals were falsely accused of raping that young lady in Central Park. Um, and it, I think what's most unique about it, not just the fact that they were falsely accused, and obviously later, many years down the road, one of the guys that they happened to be in prison with came out and proclaimed that he had actually raped the woman and given his part about it. But unfortunately, Donald Trump, after they were acquitted, basically came out and said he still believed that they were guilty, and I think that that's a powerful argument to make, because if anyone's ever familiar with Birth of a Nation or some of the things that was portrayed for African Americans in that film at the turn of the century, that's really what gave people the idea that Black people were kind of on that they were there out there to like ravage white women. They were out there to do wrong in the society. To have somebody who's the leader of essentially the free world, or not just our country, but some people across the world think that they're that position's held to be as a beacon of hope, or a beacon of someone who's voice of reason, to tell these guys that they were still guilty at the end of the day, after not only the DNA evidence acquit these guys, but the person who actually did it came out and said, like, no, this was me, and this was a circumstance that I put myself into. These guys had nothing to do with it. So, When They See Us is very dynamic film, because you see from a number of circumstances. Some of these guys got out, obviously. When you're a felon, it's difficult for you to get a job. It's difficult for you to, in some states, vote. Texas is one of those states. You just have to re-register, thankfully. But at that point in time, a lot of things have already taken place. I mean, I'm sure we're all familiar with, certain films about prison life, Oz, or whatever may have it, or TV series on HBO. Psychologically, that does something to you when you're in prison. Does things to you, whether it's physical harm by somebody else, mentally, and in doing that, you kind of see what those guys went through when they came back out. They had to figure out how they were going to be in society and live some form of life. But
Right.
I think that series is very impactful because it lets people know that not that there aren't just people that are falsely acquitted of many races, but these guys, these 5 young boys, weren't more than at the oldest, I think 15, one of them. You really see what the power of being able to tell somebody or say so that someone is guilty just by your own free will of saying so and pointing a finger, kind of like we saw with Amy Cooper most recently in Central Park.
Yeah.
It was nothing for her to say, honestly, in the same, obviously, park that those 5 young men were accused, that someone's threatening me, threatening my life.
Right.
And if we look back on things, that's obviously something that can have very strong implications, and it's very impactful to people in our community as well.
No doubt. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, it's basically just a lot of miscarriages of justice. You saw how those guys were interrogated, and now, in full disclosure, the New York Police Department, and as well as I think the victims crime unit, I can't remember her name, but they did, speak out saying that they were misrepresented and
Right.
when they see us. But yeah, for a lot of people that were involved in that story, those 5 young men, some of the other police officers, they corroborated a lot of what happened in that film. I think that's on Netflix. So you brought up A Birth of a Nation. That's actually on my list too, man. So and I'll actually speak of A Birth of a Nation. So Birth of a Nation was a film in the early 1900s that was based on a movie called a book called The Klansman. So The Birth of a Nation is actually considered to be the first blockbuster film in American cinema. And this movie is very significant because of how it was filmed and just its cinematography. But the story that was told in Birth of a Nation is critical. It relates back to what you just said, Brandon, talking about that's the first time really in media that it was that being Black was weaponized, being described as being a criminal. There were a lot of all of the racial stereotypes and such that were present in the early 1900s were present in that film. This is the first film that was actually showed in the White House. So Woodrow Wilson screened Birth of a Nation in the White House. What are some other key details I want to say before? Oh, and it was really pretty much A Birth of a Nation, that film, there's 2 of them. I'm going to talk about the other one in a second. So we're actually going to have 38 films, but I did Birth of a Nation, both of them, because it was the same name. But anyway, that was a recruitment tool for the Ku Klux Klan. And ultimately, when the Ku Klux Klan burns crosses, and they're known for doing that, that was not part of their behavior prior to this movie. So in this movie was the first time that the representation of the Ku Klux Klan actually had burned a cross. So moving on, I'm actually gonna go again real quick, Brandon. So Birth of a Nation, the second one. So there was a more recent film that came out called Birth of a Nation that came out in within the last 4 years or so, I think 2015, 2016 or so. This has the same title as the film I just spoke to you about before, the black and white Birth of a Nation. But this Birth of a Nation had to do with the civil uprising, that the slave revolt that was led by Nat Turner. So that was a very good movie as well. And I'm not going to really expand upon it that much. I mean, that much more I'm not sure there's much more detail necessary for that. What you got?
Yeah. Next up, I have Hidden Figures. So this is a movie that recently came out, I want to say about 3 years ago. It basically explains the African-American women who were pretty impactful on the first launch that actually led us to the moon, that was able to get us into outer space, was able to pretty much launch our space program against, at that point in time, the Russians in the Cold War to make sure that we were a little bit more superior. Things you see in that movie are very unique. Kevin Costner, who's I think a pretty solid actor myself, everything from Bodyguard to, I mean, Dance with Wolves, you name it. He plays an analyst essentially in that movie, and there's a portion of the movie where all their scientists are on one end of the campus, and you have Janelle Monáe, who basically is a part of their team and a minute factor at that point, but he needs her to be able to be on top of things and on point and kind of Johnny on the spot, but she has to walk all the way across campus about a half mile plus just to use the bathroom and come back because there are no colored bathrooms in the actual facility that they work in. That was an interesting part of the movie just because you realize no matter how high of a status you might be able to achieve amongst your peers. She was a very talented mathematician. You still, to a certain extent, cannot be equal. So yet she was able to be, amongst her peers, I guess, to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, she still kind of had some things that kept her behind and held her back. I think that movie is actually very dynamic because it shows a lot of the African American women in our society are typically not at the forefront of a lot of the sciences and things that matter. So I thought that was one of the things that I put top on my list as a very strong film.
No doubt. And also the fact that, I mean, as the name of the movie implies, Hidden Figures, I mean, that's a part of American history that a lot of people don't know about. That's part of American history that a lot of Black people didn't know about. You know what I mean? So the next one I'll actually do two because one's self-explanatory. So Malcolm X, I mean, movie about Malcolm X, directed by Spike Lee. Denzel Washington plays Malcolm X. Spike Lee should have won Best Director. Denzel should have won Best Actor. I mean, period. That's all it is. You need to see Malcolm X. The next one I'll talk about as well is a movie that also has Denzel Washington. It's called Glory. So the Massachusetts 54th Regiment during the Civil War was an all-Black regiment, and their leader, their general, Robert Gould Shaw, who was played by Matthew Broderick, is their leader. He's their general, and that, as you could suspect, it's the Civil War. There's a lot of racism. Obviously, these are Black freed slaves or escaped slaves that were fighting against the Confederacy, returning back to the South where they were in bondage and such. I think Matthew Broderick does a great job in that movie. It's one of his first films that he ever made. That's probably a movie that a lot of people don't know about. I mean, people have seen Matthew Broderick in The Cable Guy and comedies and so on and so forth. But Glory's legit. And if you've ever been to Boston, in Boston Commons, there's actually a huge, I think it's like bronze depiction of the Massachusetts 54th and also Robert Gould Shaw. Yeah, sitting on his horse and all his soldiers around him and such. So in Glory, actually, I laugh because I made a mistake when I was talking about A Time to Kill the other night. But Morgan Freeman's in this as well. Cary Elwes, the guy that played in the first
Elwes,
no doubt. No, what's the Saw? The dude that was in Saw. He was actually one of Robert Gould Shaw's or Matthew Broderick's lieutenants or whatever in that movie. I already said Morgan Freeman, right?
Yeah,
and then Denzel won his best
supporting.
He won his first Academy Award for that movie. All right, that's me.
So next on my list, I have Selma. Selma is a depiction, obviously, of Martin Luther King Jr. and the people at that point in time are organizing the march to get from essentially where they were in Selma to Birmingham to go and vote. Put a team together that allowed to obviously, I guess at that point in time in history, African Americans had the ability to vote, but they were still marginalized to a certain extent in a lot of things.
Yeah,
exactly. So thank you for putting that so eloquently. I was trying to find the words. So
you good.
In that circumstance, there was a lot of things that still kept people from voting. I'll actually get to one of those on my list here in a little bit. Actually might be on your list, Mississippi Burning, Freedom Summer. So they were trying to mobilize all their troops essentially and all the people that were in that town to push forward. It's very reminiscent of what we're seeing today because there were a lot of peaceful protests taking place about at that point in time it wasn't necessarily police brutality. It was obviously in regards to civil rights, but today we're looking at things more from a police brutality perspective and peaceful protests. But you're still seeing, as Chris mentioned in his details yesterday, people being tear gassed, although tear gas has been banned by the Geneva Convention for the past 100 years. Americans still being tear gassed, people still being shot with rubber bullets. So someone was very important because it still highlighted a lot of things that we're going through today in reference to police and just Americans in general, but obviously at that point in time, African Americans. But we saw it yesterday and a couple of days ago in Georgia, where there was a lot of issues with voting in Georgia, and a lot of times people are saying it's due to the machines being wrong, and it's disenfranchising people who are really trying to vote, and that goes with redlining and things that matter. So that's a very big and important piece of our history, just because it really shed a light on how we were able to step up and really have a voice in the vote, in the United States.
Absolutely. My next one is Boys in the Hood. So Boys in the Hood came out in the early 90s. At that time, I was like 10 or so years old. And even though, my parents didn't shelter us from stuff in films and everything, I remember Boys in the Hood being one of the specific ones that at that time, I wasn't allowed to watch. And because of the violence and such that takes place, in comparison to violence in films today, it's not even that bad. But at any rate, it's just all relative,
Right.
But Boys in the Hood came out in the time of like Mortal Kombat and all that. So a lot of these media's depictions, as well as games and such that were being shown to be, more and progressively violent and everything. There was a kind of a public kind of like, uproar about that kind of stuff, understandably. But at any rate, shout out to John Singleton, may he rest in peace. He directed Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood has Cuba Gooding Jr. in it, Lawrence Fishburne. Who else? Brand Ice Cube. Yeah. What's
Morris Chestnut?
Morris Chestnut. Yeah, Morris Chestnut, no doubt. Oh my goodness, what's Ice Cube's sister's name? In that
Regina Hall?
Is that her name? Regina Hall? Or Regina King?
Regina King.
Regina King. Yeah, Regina King's in it. But at any rate, Boys in the Hood, really gave insight into really
Nia Long, yes.
Right. Yeah, Nia Long, absolutely. Gave insight into a part of society that many people didn't know about in the United States.
Right.
They grew up in, they were in Inglewood, Compton, that area of Los Angeles, South Central. Crenshaw, absolutely. So, there was a lot of stuff in the struggle that they were dealing with that a lot of people didn't know about. And there are aspects of Boys in the Hood that are based on, the director John Singleton's life. So pretty good movie, amazing movie. I mean, a lot of these movies people may have seen, a lot of them, some of them people may not have, but that's why we're talking to them today.
Absolutely. Awesome. Absolutely. My next one on my list is going to be Tuskegee Airmen. I know HBCUs are not common knowledge to some people who are maybe not live in the South. Obviously, HBCUs are all around the country, but they're more predominant in the South and the East Coast of the United States. Tuskegee is a university in Alabama, which actually all the individuals who are part of that film and are that film's depicted on are based on individuals who were part of the first Black Air Force Regiment fighter pilots in World War II. These guys were highly trained, definitely obviously had to experience a lot of, I guess you could say, obstacles, because at that point in time, there was a lot of issues with a desegregated military, which to a certain extent was a very big problem. The Air Force actually hadn't branched off from the Army at that point in time in the 40s. That wasn't until after World War II where the Air Force became their own branch of the military service. But the Tuskegee Airmen were not only one of the most highly decorated fighter pilots in the World War II, sector or campaign, but they also had some of the, I guess, what would you say, Chris, when it comes to, since I'm not a military person, highly trained, I guess, is the best way I can put it. They're very highly trained, very on
tactical, strategic, all that kind of stuff.
There we go. Yes, very tactical, very strategic. And it added a very big piece of our history, just because we, at that point in time, really hadn't had a face in the military. Civil War, we had a small part. World War One, we had a larger part. But World War Two is one of the first instances where you actually saw a lot of at that point in time colored soldiers, African American soldiers, really immerse themselves into a fight for the United States. And I think that with what you see in that movie, as far as people being able to step up, and Lawrence Fishburne is actually in that movie as well, and stake their claim on what we really felt was our fight just as much as it was some of our white counterparts, really allowed us to make our way in reference to the military. If you actually have been paying attention to the news today, or I guess yesterday, you probably saw the first Air Force Chief of Staff, an African-American Air Force Chief of Staff that was coined just, what was that, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Yeah,
Thursday?
He was approved by the Senate. I think, let's say Thursday? Yeah, Tuesday.
Yeah. His confirmation was already kind of in place. So I think seeing leaps and bounds from what you see from the 40s all the way till now in this time frame, that's really a milestone. And obviously those guys stepped away for himself. And, shout out to General Brown, and hopefully he keeps doing bigger things.
No doubt, absolutely. My next one is Rosewood. So Rosewood is a city, little town that's based here in Florida, probably about 30 to 45 minutes outside of Gainesville, if I'm not mistaken. And the story of Rosewood, John Voight's in that movie. Ving Rhames is in that movie. Oh my goodness, Cheadle, bro. What's
Don
Cheadle? Yeah, he's in that movie as well. And basically, it's just a story of a white woman who falsely accused a fictitious black man of assaulting her and raping her. And this took place in the early 1900s. And next to Rosewood, I'm not sure what the town was that was predominantly white, but Rosewood was predominantly black. And essentially, that town got burned to the ground. There were lynchings, there were false arrests, murders, rapes, so on and so forth. And that's the story of Rosewood, based on a true story. So, yeah, I guess we should also talk about what's fiction and not fiction, Brand. So like,
Sure.
Obviously Malcolm X is nonfiction, Glory's nonfiction, Boys in the Hood is fiction, but it's based on actual events from John Singleton's life.
Right.
Rosewood is based on a true story.
When They See Us, nonfiction. Hidden Figures, nonfiction. Selma, nonfiction. Tuskegee Airmen, also nonfiction. And what's next on my list is 12 Years a Slave.
Esther Roll. Shout out to Esther Roll. That's right. Terry said Esther Roll.
Thank you, Terrace.
Yeah, that's our sorority sister, man. Yo, God bless Esther Roll.
In reference to 12 Years a Slave, it's a very interesting depiction of a film where, obviously, at the time that it was depicted in the 1840s, there was free and non-liberated states in the Union. Essentially, the main character, I always get his name wrong. His last name, you pronounce it Chikiri. It's very hard. It's not as easy as Idris Elba, but
the black dude that's in the Brothers, the Four Brothers. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, he's British, but he
is British.
I can't pronounce.
I can't do it.
Yeah,
he's the main character. It kind of chronicles the time frame in which he's actually basically a free man. Accepts this opportunity to play for some individuals in DC, happens to be captured. They essentially drug him, capture him, and he becomes property of the southern states. And I think that although that story is not based on specific fact as far as his character is concerned, I think it's based on a lot of what happened at that point in time in history. Right. Obviously, there was money to be made in slavery, not just obviously on the plantations, but money to be made by individuals being able to capture free men and bring them back to the the southern states. So I think that at the end of the day, that highlights a very big point in which we was part of our history. You really realize that you being a free man, you still weren't free.
Right.
And that actually happened in DC is where he was captured. So whether the actuality of them being that far north was taking place or not, I mean, he was from New York and they brought him down to DC for, to play his violin. But that's a pretty important story just because those things actually did happen. People really were captured up north that were free and brought back down to servant servitude.
Yeah, they're essentially bounty hunters.
Yeah.
So my next one is Roots. I think Roots speaks for itself a little bit. You know, I referenced Roots earlier in my conversations. Alex Haley was the director of that miniseries. Actually, Roots is a miniseries, and then they remade Roots actually. But I would encourage people to see the original that came out in the late '70s, early '80s. Basically, yeah. Alex Haley traced back his roots, literally, as the name of the title of the film implies, back to the when his ancestors were in bondage, and told their story all the way up until what was then present day. So right. Roots was at that time, and it very well still may be, the highest rated from a viewing standpoint miniseries of all time in the United States. And another reason why is because it gave insight into a history that people didn't know about. Maybe they didn't learn about. Maybe it wasn't passed down to them from their parents. But certainly that's an experience that Black families passed down amongst generations, as far as slavery and oppression and civil rights and segregation and so on.
Yeah.
So that's Roots.
Awesome. Next up is Trading Places. Completely fictional, yeah. Which honestly could or could not be. I love this movie. I've seen the movie probably, oftentimes I'll say I see movies, 50 times, and this is one of those movies which is true. I don't know how I've managed to see it that many times throughout the years, but
it's always on TV, man.
It is always on TV, especially during the holidays. It's a movie with Dan Aykroyd. It has Eddie Murphy. Yeah. That was at his climb of his, I guess, prime at that point in time in the 80s.
Yeah, he had just left Saturday Night Live.
Like that was his very first film, I think, leaving Saturday Night Live before all the Beverly Hills Cops films. That movie basically chronicles experiment. What is it like to take somebody out of poverty and put them into a circumstance where they have everything, and take someone who has everything, essentially white privilege, and put them in a situation of poverty and how they conduct themselves and how they act.
It's a comedy.
It is a comedy.
But it's important in this conversation because of that social experiment that they do.
Right. And I was just going to say that I don't think that, honestly, if we were to do the same thing today, very many circumstances from that movie, although it was meant to be comedic, would be different. Right. You're a product of your environment, and you will thrive with what's around you. Right. Eddie Murphy in that movie thrived because he had bankers, people from Wall Street. He had people showing him his way and how to be successful.
Don't give away too much.
True. And Dan Aykroyd, he played his part. He regressed. I'll just leave it at that. He regressed for sure. Yeah. And it's a film, I think, that if you watch it, you watch it for the comedic value, but when you really look at it after our explanation, you'll be like, you know what, that was an experiment for sure. So yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, no doubt. Me too, man.
Watch that this weekend.
Yeah, and if you've seen Coming to America, there is a cameo in that movie from
Mortimer and
yeah.
Those two characters, so,
yeah. There's a So you just gotta watch it. But then also, I was gonna say something else about Trading Places, but I can't remember, bro. It's not important.
Jamie Lee Curtis is in there.
Oh yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis is in there as well. And John Landis, the guy who directed Trading Places, also directed Come to America.
Yes.
All right, so my next one is Do the Right Thing. So Do the Right Thing that's a good film. That's a good film. Spike Lee directed that movie. Spike Lee is in that movie. Rosie Perez is in that movie. The opening scene, like during the credits, in which Rosie Perez is dancing, is like an iconic scene from the 80s and such. Because many people don't. I mean, I'm sure some people my age at least, and older probably don't realize Rosie Perez was
a fly girl
for the Laker girls. Yeah, exactly. So she was killing it. But that movie chronicles, I guess, like maybe a weekend or over the course of a few days. Danny Aiello's in that movie.
2 days. It's either 1 or 2 days is max.
Yeah, and it's just about racial tensions. I'm saying racial tensions that take place in Brooklyn. You've got some white people, and there's police brutality that's displayed in that movie. The racial tension that's between Italians and blacks in Brooklyn as well.
In general.
in general, yeah, even some of the the Asian shop owner, some of the black people were hating on him because he had a business, and like some of the other black people were like, hey, you want a business, get a business yourself, you know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah, Do the Right Thing's a good movie. Ruby Dee's in there.
What's his name from Baby's Kids?
God bless her. Oh man, Robin. Oh, he's a comedian. He passed away too, man. Oh man, I can't remember that brother's name. I can't remember his name at this time right now. Oh,
but yes, he's also. I know it's gonna kill me.
I could see. Oh my God, it's on the tip of my tongue, bro.
He's a House Party.
He is in House. He's the dad in House Party. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It's all good. It'll come to us. But anyway, good movie. Do the Right Thing. Great movie, written and directed by Spike Lee.
Next on my list is Men of Honor with Cuba Gooding Jr. Also has Robert De Niro in it. It's about the first Master Chief diver in the naval history. Very big film, just because one thing that I've always been particular in reference to is like the first black film.
I had to look it up. Robin Harris.
Robin Harris.
Go ahead.
And it's like the first black film, because I feel like oftentimes it sheds a light not on necessarily facts, and it Hollywoods it up. It doesn't give some of the real detail behind things. Obviously, it's meant for entertainment value, just as everything else is that comes out of Hollywood. But in reference to Men of Honor, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character being a guy that wasn't necessarily as educated as he possibly should have been, a guy that was plucked off the farm, went into the Navy, and at that point in time, yet again, a very segregated Navy, I guess recently desegregated. At that point in time, a lot of people were seen just as cooks, as you probably saw in Pearl Harbor with Michael Bay, which is a completely different story about that movie. But a lot of guys were seen as cooks. Robert De Niro even calls him Cookie the whole entire movie, because that's when he saw him. He saw him as Cookie.
Based on a true story. Yep.
Based on that's a non-fictional film, and it took a lot of him studying and really trying to push himself to get to where he ended up at the end of his career. He ended up losing a leg in the line of duty, and it really took Robert De Niro kind of shedding some of his biases in reference to African Americans, and showing, this is a man that I care about. This is a man that's that wears the same uniform as me, and I'm going to make sure he gets up on his feet and pushes forward towards something. This movie was, I watch it and I think about it now, it's very reminiscent to me and maybe in Chris, just because our dad, obviously being in the military, reaching the highest rank he possibly can as an E9, as an enlisted man in the Air Force. I'm sure it wasn't very easy for my father. He didn't necessarily grow up in that same time frame in the military, but in general, I think that some of the things that he allotted for us, a better life, and you see that in that film, he lost those things for his family as well, and getting them to a better circumstance. And I think that's very, very important to know that film exists out there, because we don't have enough films about individuals who were the first to do something within the naval forces, air forces, army, etc. I'm sure at some point in time, like I mentioned a second ago, something will be made about General Charles Brown being the first Air Force Chief of Staff. So very, very strong movie.
Right, or even Colin Powell for that matter. Yeah, I get you. No, that was well said. My next one is The Color Purple. So The Color Purple is, I mean, I don't know a black person that hasn't seen The Color Purple. like The Color Purple is a book that was written by Alice Walker, and it's fiction, and it's based on a family, an extended family in the 1930s in Georgia. And God, this is an all-star lineup. Like Whoopi Goldberg, Oprah's in it. This may have been Whoopi Goldberg's first movie. I know it was Oprah's first movie.
Yeah.
Danny Glover's in it. I mean, this movie was nominated for so many awards. I want to say The Color Purple came out in 83 or 84. I could be wrong. Somewhere in the early 80s. Didn't win a single one. Directed by Steven Spielberg. And to this day, if you ever see an interview with Steven Spielberg discussing The Color Purple, he's very upset about it.
Yeah, he stays
one of the main reasons why, I mean, a couple years ago, there was that Oscars so white hashtag going on because there weren't any, people of directors of color or people of color nominated for best actor or actress.
Yeah.
But that year, ironically, a movie called Out of Africa cleaned up at the Academy Awards and had an all-white cast. And then here you have this, film based on the Black experience and the Black struggle, and pretty much predominantly an all-Black cast, directed by Steven Spielberg, and
Who
they got
can't
shut out.
miss?
Say it again.
I said, who can't miss?
Yeah, they got shut out. So, but anyway, The Color Purple is a classic film. I think that's something that that's definitely up there.
So this next film is on the Black experience. It's called Color of Friendship. It's also nonfiction. This was, if you're a kid that grew up in my day and age, I'm sure Chris may or may have seen it.
Oh yeah.
It is a Disney movie.
I probably turned that movie on for you, man. What are you talking about?
Honestly, yeah. They don't make movies like this anymore on Disney, or they could, for all I know, but I'm pretty sure that's this impact.
Yeah.
It's about apartheid. Obviously, we didn't necessarily experience apartheid here in the United States, but it definitely still deals with the Black experience. It deals with basically foreign exchange. A young African-American girl goes to South Africa. A young South African girl comes to the U.S., actually D.C. at that time, to experience some of the differences of what's happening and what's taking place.
Hey,
at
Brandon,
that point,
restate the movie name.
Color of Friendship. The Color of Friendship. It's interesting because I'll just kind of go on a quick caveat of this. One of the things that she's teaching her the young Black girl in that movie is she's asking, in the United States there's Black, and then there's obviously the negative term for African Americans, and in her term there's Bantu, there's Kafir, there's Black, there's colored, there's all these different classifications of African Americans, and her going over to
they
exchange.
They were just Black people. They were just Africans.
Correct, they were Africans,
yeah.
but there was different derogatory.
Oh, right, yeah.
Frames of mind for Black people.
Because the color, yeah.
Yes, so kind of going through that instance where she went over there and she saw that there's people that have labels. Pretty much, you have to wear a name, you have to wear a tag. It's a very strong socioeconomic colorism state of mind. And that movie was strong, being just a kid watching that, understanding, what apartheid was or what that really even took place, because they were having apartheid movements and civil rights movements 50 years post, or I guess at that point in time it was 90. So like 40 years post, what we were having them. Our situation wasn't fixed by any means, but obviously they were having some strong struggles of civil rights and what was right and what was wrong. So that movie is definitely a strong film. And for people who are having a hard time maybe understanding what's happening right now, not to disrespect, but that really helps people understand some of the differences that we have gone through here and what the differences that individual went through in South Africa, which is heavily Dutch, heavily white populated. And how those struggles relate and how they differ just based off of what we went through just in a different country.
And the other aspect of Color of Friendship, Brandon, that I'll add to that I think is amazing too, as it relates to the United States, is the colorism aspect, right? So it really highlights the different aspects of, and just how you have the class system, if you will, as it relates to what color you are. There
Right.
are our brothers and sisters of that are Latinx. They deal with that in their community. As far as
Right.
Being looked at differently because they may be darker, they may be lighter. People in the Black community, that's something that we don't talk about enough either. How
Right.
some darker skinned or darker complexioned Black people are looked at versus in comparison to our lighter skinned counterparts and such. So it's a good movie. It's a good movie, and it's a Disney
Yes.
film, so it's age appropriate and everything like that.
Yes,
So my next movie, brand, is Glory Road. So Glory Road is a movie that is also a Disney film, I think. Yeah, I think it's a Disney film, right?
Didn't come out on Disney Channel, but it was Disney made.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Disney produced or whatever. Glory Road basically is the story of the first starting 5 all Black NCAA championship team, and it's
Right here in
amazing.
Texas.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think they're now the present day UTEP, right? Wasn't it like
No,
South?
Southwest Texas is now, I want to say, George, that's Georgetown, or it's north of here,
Okay, okay.
or
So
Texas State. Yeah.
you sure? I think it's UTEP. You sure? I don't know. We'll
You
look that
you
up
you
later.
keep moving. You keep
At
moving.
any rate, I'll keep it moving. But anyway, Glory Road's an amazing film. It talks about what those guys were going through, the dichotomy of the, skill versus race situation as related on their team. The coach at that time, Don Haskins, he recruited, these players from New York and different cities. I'm thinking maybe in Chicago. Yes, UTEP. Yeah. So at any rate, there were racial tensions on the team. There were racial tensions from their own fans, from their boosters when they're on the road. Even just the ridiculous aspects of Glory Road related to, do you think the black man has the skills or the mental capacity to be able to take the
Right.
pressure of playing a game, just stuff like that. They're playing in arenas where the Confederate flag is flying around, and but anyway,
Right.
and one fun fact from that movie is the in that national championship team. I'm sorry, that national championship game.
Pat Riley was
Um,
on that team.
yeah, Pat Riley was on the University of Kentucky team that
Hmm.
lost to these guys. So
Hmm.
that's the fun fact for Glory Road. Back to you.
So the next on my list is Freedom Riders. It's a very Dangerous Mind-esque film, but it's actually a nonfiction film, so that's based in reality. Hilary Swank plays the main teacher in that film about basically, if you think about it in terms, if we were thinking about Latinx, kind of like a stand and deliver type
Yep.
situation.
Yep.
Kids who were thought they were incapable of being able to write or be at a high level of standard, and this based in LA as well, kind of just like stand and deliver with Edward Gyms almost, and showing that they had the same skills and skill sets to rise to the occasion. Unfortunately, that movie didn't get as much press as it probably should have. But it's like I said, it is based in reality, based in true circumstance, and based in a very difficult time frame in Los Angeles. And I mean that's really, it's like I said, it's really very very reminiscent of Stand and Deliver. Kids that weren't given a chance, that really worked their ass off to get to where they needed to be.
Yeah. If this Stand and Deliver obviously doesn't pertain to our talk today, but that's my movie, man. Like Lou Diamond Phillips is
It
that
is.
he's that dude, man. He was cool. So my next one is Four Little Girls. So Four Little Girls is a documentary by Spike Lee, and it is the story of the 16th Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, that got bombed by the Ku Klux Klan, in which four little girls died and many other people were injured. And it's in depth. It is in depth. I mean, Spike Lee has conversations with, the families of these girls, people that were in the church, white supremacists that were, present, that were back then. And, you hear about the 16th Baptist Church, in different times, like it, you had Democratic nominees during the debates, just like throwing out, that information and so on and so forth. But it really kind of frustrates me because they didn't have any context behind it. They didn't provide any
Right.
context with it. They were just trying to throw out like, it's just the matter in which sometimes that movie is that experience is utilized to talk about the Black struggle. Sometimes it's tasteful and sometimes it's not. But at any rate,
Right.
that movie is huge. I mean, it also gives light to
Documentary, HBO doc.
I'm sorry, yeah, documentary. I'm sorry. That documentary is significant because it also gives light to just and I referenced this yesterday in my conversation. Yeah, I don't condone rioting at all. I don't condone that in any stretch. But at any rate, people kind of forget how dangerous it was to live in the South throughout the 60s. I mean, Birmingham,
Yeah.
Alabama was nicknamed Bombingham because there was Bomb Hill. You know what I'm saying? Because like
Right.
Black people's homes were just getting firebombed. Like churches were getting firebombed. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And churches are getting burned down in the South. I'm not gonna say
Still,
not to this day, but it still
they are.
happens. It still happens. Yeah.
It still
So
happens.
at any rate, Four Little Girls really is really in depth, and I think Spike Lee did an excellent job with that documentary.
He did. Um, my next story is going to be Lean on Me, also based in reality, nonfiction movie. It has Morgan Freeman. It has the principal the teacher that plays like the assistant principal. I can't remember that at the time young black lady's name.
I
Who
can't
kind of like
remember that.
stands up to him.
Yeah, I can't remember
Uh,
right now either.
he's in there. His friend that's on the school board. He's in there. Basically, that film's based on our parents grew up in New Jersey. They grew up in Jersey City, which is now kind of like much like the east side of Austin where I live, pretty gentrified. But at the time, it was relatively rough. Um, and it's not based in Jersey City, but it's based in New Jersey. And Morgan Freeman's character basically has to come back to a school that's failing, bring it back to prominence, or at least to where the school system can deem it not to be shut down, and deem these kids as a failure. There's drugs that's obviously taking place. There's a lot of kids that are skipping school, kids that are coming in and out of school that don't belong. He employs some tactics that are obviously not very I guess PC. He puts locks in the doors. He gets security guards at that point in time. In the early 80s, late 70s, security guards in schools really weren't a big thing.
Right,
Nowadays, everyone has like obviously some type of on-campus security, but
right.
these guys were armed and ready to
Source
go, and
something.
right, and ready to go and get some of these negative elements out of there. And he is seen as some parents as agitators because he pushes some of the negative elements of these students out of there, and some of those parents don't like that. Obviously, they think that what's happening is just fine. But I think the biggest thing about his character is that he doesn't give up. He's very resilient and making sure that the education is where it needs to be for these kids, and it shows what the struggle is like for inner city kids who don't have the same funding, who don't have the same maybe their parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, so they don't have the same focus that you possibly could have. Luckily, Chris and I didn't grow up in that circumstance where, I mean, we were military kids predominantly on military bases, so we didn't necessarily have to grow up in a circumstance where the teachers didn't care per se. But in many instances today, a lot of school systems are funded by the property taxes where you live. In Texas, the Robin Hood rule negated that, so a lot of even funding is spread out. But if you live in an affluent area, where are the teachers who want to get paid going to want to go to that affluent area to make sure their degree isn't worth anything? Because of course, as we see now, teachers don't get paid enough. Where I grew up, teachers starting pay is about $55,000, so that's pretty damn good in comparison to the average teacher, which in LA or Arizona might be around 30,000, 25,000, 28. So that really sheds a light on what differences there are in our economic system and how disenfranchised you can be. As much as you want to be on top of progressing yourself, you can still be a little bit set back just based on your circumstances that you don't have any control over.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm about, as a time check, Brand, I'm about halfway through my list, just letting you know, man. So the
Okay.
next one, the next movie that I wanted to bring up is A Time to Kill. All right, so I referenced A Time to Kill in my second conversation earlier this week, and I misstated something, so I really have to apologize to my man Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know what I was thinking, Brandon. I was rolling, man. I was like, Matthew McConaughey's in there. I was like, Morgan Freeman's in there, and I was watching the video after the fact. I'm like, Morgan Freeman's not in A Time to Kill, man. So I was just clicking, man. I was clicking. But at any rate, yeah, Samuel L. Jackson, Morgan. What am I doing? I'm doing it again. Samuel L. Jackson, Matthew McConaughey. I think I was stuck on the M's or something. Is what it was.
The black cop,
Charles S. Dutton.
Charles S. Dutton, and the older lawyer.
Oh, Kiefer Sutherland's dad, Donald Sutherland.
Yeah, Donald Sutherland. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, it's Sandra Bullock's in that movie too. Actually, my girl Sandra Bullock. Yeah. So no doubt. So A Time to Kill is fictional. It was based on a book written by John Grisham, and basically tells a story about a little black girl who's assaulted by 2 racist white guys. And I'm not gonna give away too much, but that movie is huge. It's huge. Basically, you know, I referenced this in my All Lives Matter conversation. If you have a difficult time communicating All Lives Matter to someone who doesn't get it or doesn't get the Black Lives Matter movement or doesn't understand why this movement is significant, watch the closing scene. Google the closing scene to A Time to Kill, and it's basically Matthew McConaughey's He's representing Samuel L. Jackson. Matthew McConaughey is the attorney. Google and look at the final scene of A Time to Kill, basically Matthew McConaughey's closing arguments. That is the definition of why. I mean, if you have to put it in a film, you know what I'm saying? Like if you need to show someone something, his remarks and what he says in that final moment is why that's what Black Lives Matter is all about. And again, this is a fictional movie. It came out, what, Brandon, like mid-90s, late 90s or something like that?
Early 90s. I was like 94 or 5,
I
something
don't think
like
so.
that.
I think we were back. Was it? Whatever. It doesn't matter. It came out in the 90s. So, but like, yeah, A Time to Kill. That movie's heavy. Good book. Great film. Back to you, man.
96.
Yeah, no doubt.
So next on my list is going to be To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee book. I'm sure we all probably read this book as a child.
Hopefully,
I would hope whatever school system you were in was on top of that at least. Fahrenheit 451, To Kill a Mockingbird, Death of a Salesman, all those probably, you know, at some point in time you read. But this movie or this book turned into a movie adaptation with Gregory Peck, where he's a lawyer, basically shedding light on the fact that the wrongdoings of society, which at that point in time was very heavily segregated. This is what, the 40s, 30s, maybe. I think that time frame that book was supposed to be in. It's very impure to cast negative light on someone who is as a pure person. The main character being Gregory Peck, and you know, you have Scout and her brother, and really trying to figure out what's going on in those times and why, you know, what's happening as far as that trial is taking place and why it's such a big deal. Really showing the injustices of a Black man being able to be charged for something that he had absolutely nothing to do with. And you even see in the movie, if you prefer the Cliff Notes version of the movie as opposed to reading the book, as most of us probably did when we were in school, but some of the characters really being put in their place. But still, some of the reality of that time was, no matter how right somebody is and how right Gregory Peck was in defending him, you know, people are going to see what they want to see. Color was very strong, and it was very dynamic, I think, at that time for Harper Lee to actually write that book.
No doubt. My next two I'm going to put together, right? So because they're both about Mississippi, right? So my first one is Mississippi Burning. So basically, Mississippi Burning has Gene Hackman, Willem Dafoe. Those are the two main big characters.
Yeah.
Actors or actresses I know from that movie, Brandon. But Mississippi Burning it's based on a true story of 3 civil rights workers who were helping to register Black people to vote in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and they were killed by the Ku Klux Klan. The FBI comes down. I can't remember. It was Hoover? Was J. Edgar Hoover
He was still the yeah.
At that time, yeah. So J. Edgar Hoover, you know, it got national attention.
That was 62 or 63.
Right. This was around the time of like Emmett Till's murder and such. But at any rate, the FBI comes to Philadelphia, Mississippi to do an investigation to kind of find these guys. And in the course of, because first they just went missing. No one even knew they were dead yet. And then they were found, dead, you know, two white guys and a Black guy. And the Ku Klux Klan killed them. And, you know, some of the amazing and just phenomenal aspects of that movie is the fact that, you know, through the course of the FBI investigation, it was found that the Ku Klux Klan was all through that community. They were in law enforcement. They were in local government. They were just, you know, basically, because what happened was
entrenched. They were very entrenched.
Exactly, into all aspects of, you know, the society that, you know, is supposed to protect you, you know, and the aspect of society that's supposed to protect you. So these guys, you know, essentially got pulled over by a cop, member of the KKK, and got arrested. Got turned, you know, the KKK got their hands on them, and then there it goes. The Mississippi Burning isn't so much about the actual crime of what happened to them. I mean, it's based on that, but it's really more so about the investigation and what happens to all those guys that that did this to them. But also, you're going to notice, I'm not going to give away all the details. You'll notice also the FBI's challenge in even prosecuting this case, because they knew that they're not going to be able to win a case in the
With the
South
jury or their peers.
with the jury of all white people for the death of a white person. I mean, two white guys and a black guy that are helping black people to register to vote. So that's pretty significant as well. So check out Mississippi Burning. My next one is Ghost of the Mississippi. So Ghost of the Mississippi is a movie that's based on Medgar Evers' assassination. Whoopi Goldberg plays Medgar Evers' wife in that film. And it's just, I mean, Medgar Evers, basically, he also, obviously, by the name of the film, Ghost of Mississippi, he lived in Mississippi. He was the field secretary for the NAACP. And, much like other civil rights activists at that time, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Angela Davis, they all had, attempts on their lives, and they all had death threats and so on and so forth. But Medgar Evers was also killed by a white supremacist also. And that movie is based on true facts. I'm not sure that it can be stated as being nonfiction, but it's based on true facts relating to the murder and assassination of Medgar Evers.
Gotcha. Next on my list is Something the Lord Made. It's a movie with Mos Def, and I'm trying to think of the guy that played in Die Hard as the bad guy.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember which one. The first Die Hard?
First Die Hard.
Oh, man. He just passed away, too.
He did. About 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah,
he was
remember.
The guy that played in all the Harry Potter movies. So he's actually the physician in that movie. He's an open heart surgeon. And Mos Def plays a janitor, basically, in that time frame. He was hired as a janitor, basically. He had gone to school. He wanted to kind of further his education. Unfortunately, in the time frames that we lived in the 1930s, no matter how much of education you had, you probably still couldn't get the job that you really wanted to have. So he pretty much becomes their apprentice and handling the tools and whatever that job title might be in the operating room for Dr. Blaylock, who is the character, a guy named in real life I can't think of. And he's a very integral part of the first open heart surgery or heart transplant.
Yep.
And at that time, credit wasn't given to him, unfortunately, because he was an African American. He didn't really get the opportunity to shed the light on what he was doing, the research he had done on some of the instruments that we actually use now today. At that time, when he had constructed himself, the clamps and things like that you need for the arteries to make sure that you're still, alive during surgery and things like that.
Not bleeding out, right?
Not bleeding out. And he was given his due many, many years later, given his honorary degree as a doctorate. But that's a very important film, because I think oftentimes in history, whether it's Uncle Nearest from Jack Daniels or Vivian, I can't think of his last name, but the character that Mos Def plays, you see oftentimes African Americans were pretty integral parts in certain pieces of history. But
didn't get the credit.
But didn't get the credit from dawn of time to early 60s, 70s, and sometimes even today. So that's why I think that movie is pretty powerful, pretty strong.
Absolutely. So I know my last two movies are pretty heavy, what I'm saying, with Mississippi Burning and Ghost of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
But my next one is Dear White People. So Dear White People, Dear White People is a comedy, but it's good. You know what I'm saying? And I can't even, I can't even remember some of the.
I think it's based in comedy, you could probably say, but I think more than anything else.
Oh, absolutely. There's legitimate themes. Oh yeah, there's legitimate themes in it, right? So Dear White People has I think it's a show now, but I haven't seen the show. But Dear White People, I want to say was either Brandon, I can't remember if it was in the theaters, but I think it was like a Showtime movie or HBO movie or something. But at any rate,
it came out in theaters.
Okay, no doubt. Okay, well, Dear White People, the reason why I'm putting Dear White People on here is because it just follows basically this group of black guys who are assimilating to a white university. And it's comedy, some of them, some people are assimilating to it. Some people are, doing their own thing and being their own people and so on and so forth. So,
right.
But yeah, so Dear White People. So check this out, Bram. We're not done. We're not done with our list, but go ahead and do your next one, and then I'll cut away, and then what I will do is we'll kick up the live again because
Okay.
we're out of time. All right, so go ahead, do your
Yeah.
next one.
Next on my list is actually Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Actually, let me get a little more focused on this one. I'll plug my phone back in here in a second. This movie is I think important to me because one, my mom loves Sidney Poitier. He's Bahamian. Sidney Poitier is a solid actor, actually the very first African American actor to win Best Actor. I want to say he actually won it for this movie, if I'm not wrong.
Hey, Brandon. Hey,
What's
give
that?
me a second, okay? It's gonna end. I'll start it back up in a minute.